All right, y'all, we are here. We are in season 2. We're on our second guest. I'm so excited to be here with Natara. Natara, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to be doing a Sunday recording of this podcast, the Ray Infinity Let's Talk podcast. This podcast is all about taking the story that you're supposed to tell, throwing it out the window, and telling your unapologetic story the way you want to tell it in your own time and your own words. And I'm Legina, the host of the Ray Infinity Let's Talk podcast. Warning, in this podcast, there is cursing and adult content.
Hello, my name is Natara Williams. I am 41 years old. My zodiac sign is Capricorn. And my goal today is, to tell you a little bit about myself, some of my ups and downs and twists and turns in life, but a seemingly straight path. And you are listening to Ray Infinity Let's Talk podcast season 2.
Oh, I can't even wait. You said a seemingly straight path. I love it. So, y'all, I met Natara through the infamous Zenobia, my sister. Like, we laugh on this podcast because we always end up talking about my sister in some type of way. But she's a powerhouse and she knows powerhouse women like Natara. Her daughter and my nephew are very much aligned, and we hope they are for the rest of their lives. And I really have just been admiring the way Natara moves, her attitude toward life that I've learned about just a little bit. And I'm really excited to sit down with her and learn exactly who she is a human. Natara, thank you so much for being a part of the guests of Ray Infinity Let's Talk.
Well, thank you for having me and for inviting me. I'm excited.
Talk a little bit about how you grew up and where you grew up and your family dynamics.
Well, I was born in Orlando, Florida. And I loved it. I mean, I my mom and dad have been married for 52 years, maybe longer than that even. Yeah, like 50. I know they've crossed the 50 threshold. Yes. These are things like we're talking about that you should know, but I don't know. I feel bad. But, my mom and dad could not have been a more perfect match from the standpoint of having a very calculated way of raising us. And super just team. They were on such the same wavelength. And I think for me, growing up, the easiest way for me to describe it is my dad used to always tell us that we're one nucleus. Like, it doesn't matter what happens outside this house or outside this family. This is your core. Like, we are a nucleus. So whenever, if my brother and I got into a fight, which we didn't really fight often, but it's just that knowing that at the end of the day, regardless of what's going on in your life, this is your nucleus. And this is where, the center of everything. And so I had a great childhood. I mean, my mom is a retired school teacher. My dad, guidance counselor. So it was all about education, but it was done in a way I realized, they just did the ultimate okie doke because from the standpoint of, I never questioned like, oh, do I want to go to college? Do I not want to go to college? It was just like, you're going to college. Right. And I didn't fight it. And I was super rebellious. But it was never a question. And it was like, oh, are you going to take these classes or not? You are taking these classes, so some kind of way they managed to just make it to where, and that's why I say it's a seemingly straight path, but I was always trying to get off of it and try to explore. And I was just the one that was kind of more the problem child. But they just had like this trunk to the tree that I was just tethered to. Like I would go this way, but I'd come back. I'd go that way and I'd come back. But yeah, no, we had a lot of happy memories growing up. And my mom was, we also had a unique kind of relationship because we were so different. Poor woman, I made her life hell. But like literally.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. So what kind of rebellion did you get into? Because I mean, you could be mischievous or you could have been like wilding out there. So like what kind of stuff were you doing, Natara?
It was, it bordered on some wilding out, some mischievousness. I mean, as a child, I was just the one that, like my brother, you could say, don't do X. And he would just not do X. Why? Because he was told by an adult not to do X. I was the Y kid. Like, why? Like, you're telling me not to do X, so I want to do X, right? And I want to know what X is. And so my dad had this way of managing me that was, he wouldn't even say, don't do X. He'd say, if you do X, then Y. And I would, okay. And I would feel like I was making a decision for myself. But even something as, the sex talk, right? I always just remember that with my dad, because he was like, you can have sex, you can do whatever you want. But number one, this is how, a man will look at you. These are some things that can happen. If you get pregnant and have a baby, this is what your life will look like. There's none of this, none of that. And I was like, oh, hell no. So I was like, as wild as I was, that's why I said it seems like a straight path, because I still ended up making the right decision in the end, because I was just like, I mean, I was that kid that you could have drugs in front of me, people smoke weed in front of me. I just never even had the desire to try it, but I was never judgmental about it. I was like, oh yeah, no, go ahead. If you want to snort that, make that happen, but I'm gonna be over here chilling. And so it was easy for me to push back on peer pressure, just because, my dad had kind of set forward for me the cause and effect.
Right.
And so I was able to, when he wasn't around, make the right decision, because I would be like, I know there's all these effects out there, and I just don't know if it's worth it. Right. So, but I was, I snuck out of the house, did a little bit of that. And I think I got it in more in high school, like college. I don't know, maybe because I went to an all white college, and, the few Black people there were, it was just a different dynamic, right? Because then you had to be careful. You're like, oh, okay, if I date this person, then you just cancel out almost everybody else, right? And so it was that few. There were like 30 of us. So it's like, then you got to go to another school if you want to date somebody
What, 30
else.
Black people?
Yeah, it was not.
Wow.
There were not many at all. So it was a very limited number. And I don't know. I look back and I'm like, man, I missed out on some golden opportunities in college. But, I think I gotten it in high school enough.
Tell me a little bit about your college experience.
People went to HBCUs. I'm like, man, I picked wrong. I mean, my mom went to Spelman. So because I was in that stage of rebellion, I was just like, absolutely not. Like we were in Atlanta, and she's like, can we just visit? I refused. I look back, I was a little asshole. I was just like, I refused to get out of the car. I was like, no, I don't need to even look at the school. You went to the school. I don't want to go to the school, period. So I did look at Emory, because we were in Atlanta, and then Stetson. And at the time, I had this idea that, okay, I want to do criminal law and some kind of, trial advocacy, stuff like that. And they had a really great trial advocacy program. And they had it basically that if you went to the undergrad and you got like a 3.2 or 3.3, you would automatically be admitted into the law school. So I ended up going there with this idea of like, okay, I'm not that far from home, because Orlando to DeLand, Florida is like 45 minutes. It's less than an hour away. And surprisingly, even though I was super rebellious, I'm surprised I didn't go to like Alaska. You mentioned Alaska to go to college, but I did. I ended up being very close to home, closer than even my brother. And then, I went to Stetson. The campus was nice, and I was like, okay, let's do it. But it was, so predominantly white school. It's small. I want to say back when I went, less than 2,000, so 1,800.
Oh, okay.
And so, there were very few Black students, and part of our Black population was, there were a couple of islands, like Caribbean islands, that had programs through their government. And so, we're like, hey, we're all Black. Like, it's doesn't matter what island you're from. And so literally that 30 wasn't even all Black Americans. It was the Black
Trinidad
diaspora.
and Tobago and all that.
Well, they had, so the Cayman Islands was
Yep.
definitely representing, because there was a program, I think they had, Jamaica, and it was, random. Like there was a guy from Bermuda, Curacao. There were like 3 kids from Curacao. And so, we ended up all kind of bonding together, because like survival of the fittest. And, Stetson's in DeLand, Florida, which is a racist area. And it was kind of understood that you were safe on campus, but if you ventured off campus, it's a completely different world. And so I never had the desire to venture off campus anyway, because it's kind of a podunk town. I hope, I might be offending people, but
but are you? But are you? Because when you're thinking about this, it's like, damn, like you're going into higher ed and you're worried about, once again, being Black in America, right, going off campus. Like
just stay on campus and you're safe.
No, it's crazy.
And it's crazy. And it was almost this thing, like, if you were ever off campus, it was understood, if you got into an incident, make sure you say you go to Stetson. Like, I go to Stetson. You almost have to be like, I belong to the white people. It's crazy thinking back about it, but it was everyone's just like, and just remember, like, if you get into an incident, and I remember one time I had gotten a car accident, and the way the cop was treating me, like, it was not even my fault, and he was treating me like I was a drug smuggler from Haiti or something. Like, he was just like an ass. And then as soon as I was like, well, I go to Stetson, and I was crying because I was upset about, the accident. And I was like, I'm just upset, and I think I mentioned something about my dad. And then as soon as like, oh, you're at Stetson. Okay, I guess I'll treat you kind of like a human being, because there's this idea of repercussions, right? If I treat this Black person a certain way. But so it was interesting, like going to Stetson, I had some amazing experiences, amazing professors. But it was the first time for me of dealing with race in that way, because my high school was very, very diverse, very mixed. In Orlando, it's quite mixed. It's a melting pot. And it was my first time really dealing with racist white people. I had not had that experience before until I went there. And so, but it definitely had its highs, its lows. Just like every kid in college, I feel like almost every Black woman, speaking of Black women, it's like you go through that woke period where you're like writing militant poems, and you're like, going through all that. And then you kind of ease down a little bit. And I did study abroad. That was the thing for me, just getting the hell out of there. I was like, okay, I went to Spain, I went to Mexico. And so, it definitely, I don't regret it. I did meet the professor who kind of connected me and kind of steered me in the direction of going to Duke for law school. So I feel like I met the people I was supposed to meet in my life. So I made the right decision. But Stetson is it's an eye opener. Maybe it's different now. That's been almost 20 years ago. Who knows?
It's a possibility. And
right.
But 20 years ago is like flat. It's like blink and 20 years went by.
Right.
And I always say that in some type of way, just like if you're white and you stay in your box, if you're Black and you stay in your box, how do you learn how to navigate other spaces? And rightfully so, Black people do have to adapt and learn how to navigate white spaces a lot more. But when you're thinking about, your profession and moving in those spaces to move up and knowing the language and how things are working because of college, it can be helpful. Now, I'm not saying that it's right, but it's almost like doing a living case study. Like, let me see what I'm going to be dealing with for the rest of my life in these spaces. Right. Let me see how I can navigate this, and let me see how I can use all of these things to my advantage to excel. So even something as simple as, the code words of things to say to make people ease up and kind of see you for, oh, the young lady that got in a wreck. Oh, I go to school here.
Right.
So it's shitty, but we play it to our advantage. That's one of the things we do.
You're listening to Lorraine Infinity Let's Talk podcast. If you love to support small brands, you should download the WOMI app, the first directory app for women and minority-owned small brands. And if you've got an online shop, create a free brand profile in less than 10 minutes. Just search WOMI in Google Play and App Stores.
What is something, Natara, that has impacted your life the most that stands out to you?
Well, for me, I mean, it's like an easy one in the sense of probably the death of my brother when I was 23. Was I 23 or 24? It's kind of like you kind of block it out. I always tell people it's the most impactful because, you know, people have different ways of grieving. And one way for me was I almost look at it like I'm two separate people. I was who I was when he was alive, and I had to become someone else in order to deal with it. And that was my way of dealing with it. So I do look at the things I liked and the things I thought I was going to do and the choices that I had pretty much decided for my life are quite variant from what they are now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah.
So when you look at your brother, your life, his life, your relationship, where was the biggest void when he passed? And also, I guess, elaborate, if you could, on what happened leading up to him passing away.
Well, and I think it's interesting. So he passed from lymphoma, and he had it, and it came back, and then he had it, he beat it, and then it came back, and that second time it was quite aggressive. And that whole process was a very insightful process for me as a person in the context of understanding myself. Because, so I was a match for him. So we actually did a transfer, not bone marrow, but through white cells. Mm-hmm. And so it's a process where it involves, like, there's kind of like a needle in one of your arms and then a needle in the other arm. You're just like this for hours. And basically they're taking out the red, or what is it? They're taking out the blood, separating, giving you back the red, right? So to give him the white cells. And so in going through that process, I think I learned a lot about myself in the context of what love is, because it helped me to understand the true sense of love being sacrifice. And before that, I wouldn't say I was selfish, but I was the youngest. So I was allowed to be selfish, and he was a very giving person. And so I think, a lot of older sibling dynamics, sometimes you can have a pushback on that, but I never did. He was more than willing to be like, yeah, you're the baby, you can have whatever you want, and kind of indulge that selfishness. And so I wouldn't say that I wasn't loving, but I had a very, and I still do, I can disconnect. I'm one of those people who, I can cut somebody off very easily. And then I'm like, okay, keep it pushing. Yep. And even I can still love you, but I can cut you off. And I think prior to that experience, that was very easy for me. And again, I don't think I really understood love, but I always look at my journey with my brother, even from as a child, because I think I would have been a different person, clearly, if he hadn't been a part of my life, because he was so loving. It really taught me what love is. And I was like, wow, okay, so love is that no matter what it takes, you'll do it. Because for myself, like, I had to go through that the first day. And I remember it takes about 4 or 5 hours. And because he was about 6'1", 6'2", and I'm 5'4", on a good day, they were like, hey, you may have to come back. Right. And I'm like, it hurts. It does hurt. And so I remember crying with my mom in the car, and she was just like, I'm so sorry you're going through this. And, she thought I was crying because I was, upset and I was in pain. And I said, yeah, I'm just crying because I know that no matter how many days I have to do this, I'll do it. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to have that pain. Now, luckily we were able to do it in 2 sessions, so it wasn't that much, but I think that for me was a break of understanding, like, okay, so this is what it means to love a person. Like, mm-hmm. You will literally give your life or your own body. Right. And so I think, like, leading up to it, that was part of it, just that process of going through that with him. And so it changed my personality to the core, I think, just that whole experience.
Would you rather be crazy rich or deeply in love?
Ooh, that's a good question. You know,
Take
it's
your
funny because
time. Take your
as soon as you said
time.
crazy rich, I was like, rich? I mean, because does deeply in love mean poor? I don't know. Like a girl's got to have air conditioning. It depends on how. I mean, okay, that's a tough one. Okay, Gina, you don't have me stumped. I will say, again, because of.
Hold on, let me give this caveat. So all these questions, like I very much feel like as humans, we put rules around like what we answer in our questions and everything.
Right.
And I'm just throwing you a question now. I did not give you rules with the question. You know what I mean? I'm not giving you rules with the question, and you automatically put rules on your question.
I did, because I was like, do I have to be poor? Because people always make you like, they set you up like, would you rather be comfortable, like have material things or love? And you're like, oh, fine, the answer's love. I gotta.
I'm like, rich.
Right? Rich because I can buy love. Like, no. And I mean, I just like, I think you can have both. Love is tricky, man. I don't know. I would say crazy rich, yet with a satisfied soul. If I could be crazy rich with a satisfied soul, I think that could look like a lot of things. So I would take that with that condition.
Oh, she went deep with it, y'all. She said crazy rich with a satisfied soul. Okay.
Yes.
That's like deep. You're talking about me giving you a deep question. You just took it all the way there. I'm like,
or did I just give you a lawyer answer and not really answer?
You totally you just like I tell Zenobia, I'm like, don't lawyer me. Don't. I'm like, that's what you just did. Now we can rewind and let's talk this through. No, but you did, but you gave me enough of an answer. So I'm in the jury and I'm like, oh yeah, that's good. Satisfied soul.
That could be a lot.
Is there something from your past that you've gone through or witnessed that you don't really like talking about?
I mean, not really. I feel like I'm fine talking about most things. I will say I kind of had and even, of course, talking about my brother, it just depends on the day, right? Because some days I'm able to talk about it. Other days I'm like, nope, can't do it. Or I can talk about it to a certain extent. And then I'm like, okay, it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I had a child, I guess you say childhood, but in high school, kind of my first experience with losing a friend. And so there's just death generally it's had a part to play. I mean, I'm sure there's people who've gone through so much more and lost so many more people. But, for me, they did, each one kind of had an impact. But not really. I will say, I think one relationship, which is also why I'm kind of a person where I'm not that head over heels, fall in love type of person. You asked that question about deeply in love. I'm like, I don't know what that looks like, because I've never been that romantic type of person, and I did have one experience where I really liked a guy, and I don't know why I got so connected. And it wasn't even that long of a relationship, but I just remember he was very, 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 very hurtful, like in the way that we separated, and to the point where years later, and I was in Spain when it happened, he came by my parents' house and, so clearly like plagued his conscience. I don't know. And for me, I was like, okay, you hurt me. And then I'm like, over it. I was like way past it at that point, but he came and he like told my mom, he's like, I apologize. And mom was like, what are you talking about? Cause she never even told me about this. But, I just remember being like, yeah, I'm just that whole love thing. You got to hold back something for yourself. Like, I've just never been that person to throw myself into a relationship. And maybe partly because of that, because I was just like, you can't give so much that you don't have for yourself. So I always hold enough of myself to be able to walk away. And that's where I do feel like I'm a person that, it's not that I don't sympathize. Like I see people who are like all traumatized after they break up and I'm like, girl, it's okay. Just find somebody else. And I have to remind myself, I'm like, Natara, not everybody is mean like you. Like, you gotta.
Well, I mean, it's not mean though. It's a different. It's the least represented way of a woman's expression of love. I will say that, because a lot of times like it's assumed that we as women like fall in love and it's head over heels and everything else.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think it's just, everyone's different. I've just never been that crying, eat bonbons, like in the movies they always show. And I'm like, is it that serious? Maybe I've never.
It is. It's so serious.
I know. It's like real serious for folks. I will say, the person that I'm with now, and sometimes he doubts that I love him. And I'm like, trust me, I do. Because everybody else I can walk away from real easy. Like my ex-husband, that was easy. I was like, oh, it's time for a divorce. Let's keep it pushing. But him is something about him. I'm like, and I think maybe that's the thing too. I think for you, your father's passing is much closer. I mean, my brother passed like 18 years ago. But for me, I think that when you know what that looks like, what the bottom looks like, and you survived. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's hard sometimes for people to understand that when you're in a relationship, it's like, it's not that I don't love you. It's just that you can leave me and I know I'll be okay. Like I've lost the most cherished thing in my life. And so, exactly. I can't say that now. My daughter is, she's the most cherished thing in my life now. But right. At that time, for me, he was the most cherished thing in my life and I survived. And so I know that I'll survive you leaving me. Will I be sad? Sure. Will I cry about it? Sure. But I'm going to get up, take a bath, go to work. It's just like, and I think that sometimes there's this idea that, well, if you're not going to be all like crazy about it, then you don't really love me. And I'm like, no, it's just different. I think once you know what the floor looks like, you're just like, okay, well, I've been there before and I made it through it. So it's not, your emotions are not as wide of a range, if that makes sense. It's just like, it's kind of a steady path versus it being such a heightened reaction.
Yeah. So when you're saying that, I wonder how scary that is on the other side of the aisle. So let's say we're together and we have claimed our love or whatever, and typically it's the woman that's more of the heightened emotions and needs the validation or whatever. And I'm being so stereotypical with this.
Yeah, but it's true. Yeah.
So just like in general. So, and also I know women that are like, yeah, if you're not like that, guys actually start noticing and they need a lot more love than they are, So how does that look on the other side for the other person? I
think I can only imagine it's tough because I think, because then you probably would hesitate to be vulnerable, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're like, I know this person will be okay. So maybe that makes it easier for them to just dismiss me and cut me off. And so I think, and that's why I say for myself, I actually I feel like, and even my brother being in my life and the relationships I've had and the people that I've met, I think that if you believe kind of in a spiritual world, and that's each spirit that's put in a body is put on this earth to learn. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking and I'm hoping, my lesson is love. I think that my spirit was a spirit that needed to learn how to love and what love is and what it looks like, because I am a hard nut to crack. And I've had these experiences with love and people in my life who are so loving, like my brother and my mom. I mean, that's where my brother got it from. My mom is just a selfless giver to the core. Like, she's such a giver. And it's this love that for me, I study it almost in an analytical way. I can't identify with it. Mm. And so I feel like that soul or that spirit is just like, what is this? What is this thing that some people have that's so innate that they can just love so freely? That's not me. And even my brother, it was years of trust and him just being such an open book to where I was just like, why do you still love me? Like I say things to you sometimes that are mean. And my mom has always even said, you've always tested my boundaries of love, as if you're just waiting for me to say, okay, that's it. I don't love you anymore. And I'll be like, oh, see, there it is.
Y'all, we're unpacking some shit because I'm sitting here feeling, I'm like, girl, this is like, but it's serious.
It is. And you're like, when will it break? These people who have been put in my life in particular that seem to have this endless love. And it's like, no, there's nothing you can do to make me not love you, you know? And I remember one time I thought that my brother had betrayed me. It was something I told him. And I was like, I know you told and whatever. And he's like, Natara, I would never do that to you. Like, I would never do that to you. There's nothing you could do to me that would make me betray you like that. And I was just like, who are you? Because, it's just, these people, and my mom is the same way. She's just, I mean, when my mother loves, she's a Leo, and she loves so hard, like a lioness. She is the ultimate lioness. Like, we are her baby cubs. My dad, I always tell him, you are lucky you have a woman like that, because another one would have put you out by now. Like, you just make this woman do all these things. He was a great dad, but, has a very 1950s idea of what, women should do. And so she's such a lioness, and just seeing that love. And it's just like, wow, that's amazing. On the one hand, it's a vulnerability and a hurt that person is going to have and feel so much. But then on the other side of it, that love that they get to feel on that deep level, so that's a trade-off, right? It's like, you can live your life in this kind of guarded way, but will you ever truly feel that deep emotion versus a person who, they're going to have to go through some hurt. They are going to be that person crying and eating the bonbons, but when they love, it is interesting. And I like to see it. I'm like, wow, that's interesting. Like, that's amazing to feel guarded? That. Huh?
Do you feel like you're guarded?
Yeah. And I think it just takes, time. Like, it's interesting. I do think I'm very forthcoming, but part of it is because part of it is age too, because I just don't care. I'm like, if you don't like me, that's fine. I have a joke that I say, all the friends I've made in life, I made when I was 12, some of my best friends, Ramona, Linda, Tiffany, like, these are all people I grew up with. Pega, she was one of my best friends. I grew up with them, and I'm kind of like, if nobody else wants to be my friend, that's okay. And I have plenty of other friends, but part of it is just not caring. And then part of it is just that, I've always kind of just analyzed it. I've always been analytical in that way. Like, I do like talking about it because it's interesting to me to get feedback and hear other people's perspective and how they live their life and how they love and how they have their experiences, because maybe I'm not as free in it. So I'm just like, oh, okay. And it helps you kind of learn to let go a little bit.
Do you like what you're listening to? Great. Follow us on Instagram at LRI Let's Talk. What do you like about yourself?
What I appreciate about myself is that even when I feel overwhelmed and I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do, I still just push through. Like, I'm just like, okay, let's just power through this. I think I'm pretty good at just handling things. Like, I will just handle it. It's kind of my good quality and my albatross in the same token, because since I'm the one that's always handling it, I think that, unfortunately, and sometimes in my closer relationships, and even romantic relationships, it's this idea that I don't need to be taken care of. And so that's probably why I value my mom so much, because she is the only person in my life who takes care of me first. But then I feel bad because I'm like, oh, but then who takes care of you? But I'm always the person, I'm going to pay the bills. I'm going to take care of this. I'm going to take care of that. This is going to be done. This is going to be done. It's all going to get handled. I'll fix it. Whenever things happen, whether it's from a funeral to a wedding or just handle it. Okay, Natara's going to handle it. And I do like that about myself. Like, there's times sometimes where I sit back when I've just even though I've been about to collapse, I'm like, damn girl, you're the shit. Like you just kill it. Right. Like I just feel like, man, you just make it happen. And then there's times where I'm like, I would just love if somebody would just, if I could have a time where I didn't have to make a decision or think about all these things at the same time and just relax.
But what's something you wish you liked about yourself or that you're working on right now?
I think like every woman, we give ourselves such a hard time about our looks and our body, and I feel like for myself, it's funny because after having my daughter, and she's 4, so I really have no excuse, but like I should have clearly lost all the weight that I needed to lose. But it's funny because I look at pictures of myself when I was, pick an age, I think I saw one when I was like 12 or 13. And I'm like, look at her. Like, look at that little cutie pie, or her body was perfect. And I know, and I remember because I kept a diary, how much I hated my body. I have never been a skinny girl, and I did ballet quite extensively. I mean, I made it up to, I wouldn't say a professional level, but I was at one of the higher levels in my ballet company. And it was always a battle because I had thighs and I had hips, and, looking back, oh my God, what I wouldn't give to have that body. Like I had quads, I had a perfectly flat stomach. My butt was like perky. But that girl, if you had asked that girl, she would have been like, I hate my body. And I hated it, and it's like over the years, I just look at, whenever I look back, and even now, before I had my daughter, and I was like, 20 pounds lighter. And I remember being like, oh my God, if I could just lose 15 pounds. And now I just saw a picture of myself the other day and I'm like, look at your bicep. Like you had a little cut in your bicep, and it's just crazy. I think as women, and there's plenty of women that don't go through this, but it's so hard to just love yourself, like at whatever stage you're in. And it's so easy to just look back at, your younger self and be like, man, I wish I had given that girl an easier time. And so I try to remind myself of that now, even at this age, because I know at 50, I'm probably going to look back and be like, look at her. She had no wrinkles. It's like, it's just appreciating yourself. And I'm just like, in the grand scheme of things, that inner voice is such a powerful, can be toxic voice that I wish I could master. I wish I could be that person that's just like, oh, it's fine. You just made a little mistake. Like, keep on going. I'm not there. One of my biggest body acceptance moments, and, it could be something different for everyone, but in 2005, I went to Trinidad Carnival. And so, you're in this little bikini, basically, in the street, right? And, again, looking back, man, that stomach used to be flat. I mean, that was my thing. I was like, the waist to hip ratio, it's like, I'm doing it. But at the time, I remember I put it on and I was like, oh, I don't know. I might want to wear my shorts. I want whatever. That was kind of like an aha moment because it did help me accept my body. I used to be very conscious about wearing bathing suits. And after I basically wore a bathing suit in front of thousands of people in the middle of a street and dance, I was like, who cares? So I would go on vacation and I'm just like, yeah, put this bathing suit on. I don't care. Like, you're going to take these thighs and these stretch marks. It's all good, but it is kind of a lesson, it's when you realize, so are you going to live your entire life not wearing a bathing suit or being worried about what people think about you when you're on the beach? Or are you going to go to the beach and listen to the waves and play in the sand and, have that experience and not even care about how you look, And so, that's my nugget. Go to Carnival. Just go to
go to Carnival, have body positivity.
Barbados, Trinidad, if you can make it to Brazil, the ultimate, do it. Miami Carnival, if you can't get out, just do it. Just put your shorts on and your little bathing suit top and make it happen.
So I heard you talk about Olivia a little bit and that, you had Olivia when you were 36. So can you talk a little bit about what that looks like, how you got pregnant? Was it a choice? where'd she come from? And, you know, I hate saying this, but we'll use the medical term, your geriatric pregnancy. What did that look like?
I know. Isn't it funny when they're like, you're a geriatric? I was like, what? I was lucky in the sense that I had a lot of friends who were much younger who were trying all kinds of fertility methods and, you know, having problems getting pregnant. And for me, I actually had never wanted to have a kid. I would just, you know, when I was younger, I never wanted to get married. I never wanted to have a kid. I was like, I'm going to travel the world and I'm going to do X, Y, Z, you know, blah, 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 and just be free. Right. And so it goes back to kind of in the beginning of our conversation when I was saying, you know, when my brother passed away, I definitely have had a different life than I would have had, because I looked at him as like, he'll get married, he'll have the kids for my parents. He can do all that while I live this other type of life, right?
I feel you, girl.
Untethered life.
And
so, you know, when he passed, I was like, man, you know, I started making different decisions and trying to be there more for my parents and kind of taking on that only child responsibility. And, you know, I had thought about it and I was like, yeah, you know, I kind of feel bad for them. Like they'll never have a grandchild. And so I initially, you know, probably looked at it like, well, I'm doing it more for them. And I was like, well, here's the deal. If I get pregnant, I get pregnant, you know, that's how I'll just deal with it. Cause I couldn't make up my mind. Like, do I want to have a baby or not? And I was like, here's the deal. I'm just going to not, how do you say, I'm going to not try not to, or I'm not going to try to prevent it. Right?
Yeah, you're not going to try to not do it.
Right. If I get pregnant, then I'll deal with it. Right. Once again, this goes back to I just handle things. So I was like, I'll just deal with it. And so, you know, the person that my boyfriend, I've known him for a very long time. And I kind of felt comfortable, you know, I love him. And I was like, well, you know, regardless, I know he would be a good dad. Like he's very loving with kids. And even if he's not, I kind of was even at the point in my life where I was like, I think I'll just have a kid anyway. And I could do it on my own if I have to do it on my own. So let's just see what happens. And I got pregnant like pretty quickly. I was like, all right, well, here we go. And actually, you know, I got pregnant twice. So the first time, and it was more almost like a chemical pregnancy because I was pregnant, but then, you know, not. And so I miscarried, but it wasn't in a physically painful way, you know. So I had a miscarriage and I was kind of like, well, you know, but then it kind of affected me more than I thought it would. I was like, well, wait a minute, I kind of made me sad. Like maybe I do want one. And then I was like, okay, back at it again. If I do, I do. If I don't, I don't. And then I got pregnant like 2 months after. It was like right after. And, you know, it was a journey. So I've had blood clots in the past. So I had to like inject myself with blood thinners, but the whole time, but that actually didn't bother me that much. I was just like, fine, it's just something I have to do. And so I knew I was going to have a C-section, but you know, I always remember, and I even tell Olivia about this, like, I just remember her crying, and like the moment that they laid her on my chest, when people talk about that moment, it's real, because she just stopped crying immediately. And I just remember smelling her, and it's like that emotion that comes over you, it's real. Like you're just like, whoa, this is what heaven looks like this little piece of heaven. And I can still remember she was just like this little tiny little thing, but I just always remember how she was like, you know, just crying. And as soon as they put her on my chest, she just stopped crying. And it's just that moment that you're like, you know, and then you're like, okay, you know. And then I had a lot of complications afterwards, so I didn't really get to revel in that so much, but I do still remember just how tiny she was, and, you know, just that smell. There's nothing like that smell. It's just that it's so primal, right? And, you know, it's been a journey ever since. I mean, Olivia is a challenge, but God bless my mother. I'm like, Jesus, woman, how did you do it? You know, I think she truly is giving me it back ×3. Mm-hmm. But it, you know, I always, before having her, and I've said before, I always felt like I would be doing something in life and I would feel like my skin was crawling. Like was just needed to get out, and I would just have to travel. I'd have to do something. I'd have to whatever. And I would be so unsettled, and it literally would feel like an itch under my skin that I couldn't get out. But after having her, I remember the first time that I was like, wow, I haven't felt that in a long time, you know? So she definitely completed me and filled a void in me.
So I heard you say that you have an ex-husband and a boyfriend. So how long were you married? When was like the stop point? And is your boyfriend a fiance to a husband, or what does that journey look like for you?
Well, I was married for 4 years. Had to think about it. Again, I want to go like when I close a chapter, it's like closed. So I'm like, wait, what happened? I have to like reopen the book. I'm like, that book has been burned. Yeah, no, it definitely was not high school. Nothing. It was a decision made for all the wrong reasons. I think. I don't know. I don't know what I was doing. But and you know, and I say that, and God bless him, poor thing. I hope he's doing well, but I never ever want to see him again. You just gotta move on. Yeah, so it was 4 years. It just was not the right thing for a lot of reasons. And I think, again, it was me trying to, I don't know, like do what I thought I should be doing at a certain age. You know, it's like, okay, people are getting married now. Oh God, I guess I got to get married. Okay, I guess I got to do this, you know, and I've never been a conventional person. And I think whenever I try to force myself to do what other people do, it just doesn't work out for me. You know, my current relationship, he's my best friend. And I think that's the reason why I'm like, oh God, I just can't get rid of you as easily as I thought. I do love you.
You're like, we're besties.
He is my bestie, you know, and we were friends for, like about 8 years before even really kind of pursuing a relationship. So that friendship is there, you know, which can come in handy, and sometimes it's not so handy because, you know, sometimes your friend knows things that you're like, damn, you really know how I move. Right. It's like,
you're like, you don't have to act like you know me.
Right. So you used to know me when I was like in my big pimping days, and you're still holding it against me. Like, because see, they've seen you. What's that song? It's like, a Drake song. Like, I've seen you do your dirt. So yeah. I know how you do your dirt. I know how you move. But yeah, no. And I think right now, neither one of us feel the need to be married. But, you know, I mean, we probably are close to common law at this point. I just think, and I think we might, you know, it probably, I don't rule it out. I just look at the fact that from the beginning, as a child, I never wanted to get married. Like I had always said, I don't want these certain things. And then when I tried it, I was like, well, see, that didn't work. You know, I will say I do understand. I think Oprah had explained once, like, why she wasn't married. Because she's like, this idea or this definition of a wife is not something, you know, that she could be or would ever be for Stedman. You know, it's like, she's like, I kind of want more than that. So I don't know if it's some of that or not, but I also, part of it is like, I think the more people are like, oh, aren't you going to get married? Shouldn't you get married? And I'm like, am I marrying for others or for myself? You know, and he's perfectly comfortable. Well, he says he's fine. So I think we're good, you know, but I definitely, the commitment level is the same. And I think we're both committed to our daughter's future. And so I had a really good example of that growing up. And so I do try to replicate that with him. Like, we're not married, but what my parents had of that unity in focus of where they wanted us to go as their kids, trying to replicate that, I think, is where our common bond will always be. What is something that you have learned a little bit too late in life?
And I mean, it goes back to kind of like what we've been talking about. Like, I probably learned a little too late in life the lessons that my parents gave me, how to apply them in the right way and not consider them a burden of having two parents, which is so unfortunate that I had those thought process. Like, damn it, I have two parents. This is very taxing for me. But this is taxing. But what is something that you feel like you've learned a little bit too late in life, and how do you expect to change that, like, for your daughter, or to give her like those nuggets that you wish somebody could give you without forcing them on her?
I will say, and I think part of the reason why I tend to be so forthright is because I just kind of have this idea of a level of authenticity and trying to be myself regardless of who I'm around. And so, again, I know color just, it is what it is, because as a Black woman, it's so pervasive in our life. But growing up, I mean, from kindergarten until 8th grade, I went to a predominantly white school and went through a lot of, when you're the only Black person, it's from your nose to your hair to this to that. Like, kids can tease you in a certain way. And I learned pretty quickly how to turn that and turn into the quote unquote popular girl, if you will. But it wasn't without some angst along the way. And I think saying what I want to say and feeling how I want to feel, I look back even in some moments in high school and college, and I for my daughter, I identify in her that she cares so much. Like, she's very impressionable, and she's not that kid. I see some kids on the playground that are just doing it. They're like, you follow me, right? And so without pushing it on her too much, I'm like, don't be a follower. And I was never a follower, so it's not like something I did that I identified too late, but I do think I cared too much, maybe in some way. And so that's something recently I've been really cognizant of, because she's kind of repeating my history of being the only one, right? The only Black girl, her and one other, and she just had a child innocently ask her, why are you brown? And I was like, well, did you ask him why is he not brown? Like, the mama in me wants to be like pushed back. But I'm like, well, your mommy's brown and your daddy's brown, and this, and just even talking to her about race. And I want her to be comfortable and not feel like out of place, but she's one of the only ones. Right. And so I'm hoping that she doesn't have to go through as much as I went through, just because, I think all the recent events have shown us that we have not evolved as much as we thought we had. But I hope we've evolved a little bit more. I definitely think there's some evolution because of the internet, because of the connectivity of people, that this idea that somebody can go and have never seen a Black person their whole life, like, that shouldn't be as pervasive, right? You hope. And so I'm hoping that the teasing, because it's going to happen, that she has to go through, has a little less of that stigma attached to it, and that she cares less about what people think and feel.
Okay, so Natara, I really appreciate you being on the show and taking time away from your family and everything you have going on, because we will find out on Tuesday that you are a beast, a powerhouse. And I want to thank all our listeners for listening to season 1 and sharing the love and giving all of that good stuff. Is there anything that you want to close up with or tell us before we get done with our episode, Natara?
I think my one thing I would tell people, and it's a journey, but try to live your life as true to yourself as you can. And I think you'll be at the most peace with yourself and with the decisions that you make if you're true to yourself. And figuring out who yourself is an everlasting journey. But along the way, if you feel like the decision you made aligned with who you were at that time, you'll be able to have a lot more peace in life. And I'm working on that myself.
Well, damn, another nugget. Like, seriously. No, but that's really good. I love that. So everybody out there, as always, tell your story, be your own brand, live your truth, and stand in your moment.
All right, everyone. My name is Natara Williams. I am 41 years old, and I hope you all enjoyed hearing a little bit about my life and myself, and that some of it resonated for you. You just listen to my story as I live my truth and stand in my moment on the Lorraine Infinity Let's Talk podcast season 2. Thank
you. Woo. Thank you for being on, Natara. I appreciate you so much. Beep. I'll say something. You say the first thing that pops to your mind. It can be a noise. It can be a cuss word. It can be whatever you think of. You say it to get the creative juices flowing. I'm going to go pretty fast, so pop them out as they go. If you can't think of anything, say pass. Are you ready?
All right, let's do it.
Okay, let me get my word list. Beep. Up. Smartphone.
Need it, love it.
Yoga.
Don't love it, need it.
Leather.
Love it, have it.
The word hate.
Try not to have it in my heart.
Color.
Purple.
Diet.
Always on it, never working.
Pressure.
Always under it, but maintaining.
Past.
Pass.
Present.
Never a dull day.
Future.
Hopefully something exciting.
Freedom.
What I cherish.
Star.
My daughter.
CBD.
Marijuana.
Pledge.
AKA.
Paper bag.
Not lighter than a fresh paper bag.
Test.
I'm good at them.
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
A word to spell when you're bragging.
Ooh, you have some good ones. Okay. Clearly, I feel like you're perfect.